Section 1. You're in your car in a grocery store parking lot, screen glowing in your hand, watching the same thread like it might change if you stare hard enough. Your last message sits there, delivered, and the silence feels louder than any reply. Here's the question that flips this whole problem. What if rejection and ghosting don't wreck you because they reveal your value, but because you treat them like a verdict instead of an event? When someone disappears after a good first date, when a recruiter goes quiet after telling you we'll be in touch, when a friend stops responding right when you were counting on them, it doesn't just sting. It hijacks your attention. You keep checking your phone, you reread what you sent, and you start editing your own personality in your head. You lose hours to overthinking and you lose sleep to imagined explanations. And if this pattern repeats, you start shrinking your life, not because you don't want connection, but because the cost of hoping feels too high. The stakes are real. If nothing changes, you don't just feel rejected in the moment, you start training yourself to expect rejection everywhere, and that quietly drains your confidence, your focus, and your willingness to try again. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to do 3 concrete things today. You'll be able to interrupt the spiral the moment silence hits, so you don't spend the next 2 days emotionally bargaining with your phone. You'll be able to keep your self-worth intact even when the outcome isn't what you wanted, so you stop turning "they didn't choose me" into "I'm not worth choosing." And you'll be able to keep dating, networking, and reaching out without shutting down after one no, one delay, or one disappearing act. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. If you want steady Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships every week, this is the channel for you. Stay with me until the very end, and while you're here, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's lay out what we're going to do, in plain language, so you're not just hoping you feel better, you're building a response you can repeat. First, we're going to break the automatic meaning your mind assigns to silence, because that meaning is what makes you spiral. Next, you'll learn how to create a small gap between the trigger and your reaction, so your emotions stop dictating your behavior. Then we'll install one sentence you can use in real time, something you can say to yourself or send as a calm reply, so you don't double text, over-explain, or lash out. After that, we'll set a simple rule that protects your attention and self-respect when you feel pulled into the checking loop. Finally, we'll apply it in a realistic situation where you'd normally cave, where you're tempted to chase, punish with silence, or quit altogether, and you'll see exactly how you stay steady without pretending you don't care. Here's the deeper problem underneath rejection and ghosting. Your brain treats uncertainty like danger. Silence isn't just silence. Silence becomes a blank screen your mind projects onto. And the movie your mind plays is rarely kind. It says, you came on too strong. It says, you weren't interesting enough. It says, they saw the real you and backed away. That internal narration doesn't feel like a story, it feels like facts. But it's not facts. It's interpretation, and interpretation is where you still have leverage. This is where Stoic thinking is useful, not because it makes you cold, but because it makes you clear. Epictetus points out in Enchiridion section 5 that what upsets you isn't the event itself, but your judgment about the event. Ghosting is an event. A no is an event. A delayed reply is an event. Your judgment is the part that says, this means I'm unlovable, or this means I'm not respected, or this means I should never try again. That judgment is what turns one moment into a week-long collapse. And I want you to notice something important. Most spirals have 2 phases. The first phase is pain. That's normal. You feel it in your chest, your stomach, and your shoulders. Your thoughts speed up. You feel small or angry or embarrassed. The second phase is self-attack. That's the part where you keep the pain alive by treating it like proof of your inadequacy. Emotional control isn't about deleting phase 1. It's about refusing to fuel phase 2. Because when you fuel phase 2, you don't just suffer, you act in ways that create more suffering. You send a message you later regret. You write a long paragraph that reads like a negotiation for basic respect. You ghost back as punishment, then feel hollow. You stalk their social media, then feel worse. Or you do the opposite. You shut down completely and tell yourself you're fine, but you're actually building a wall that blocks the next good opportunity, too. Either way, your future gets smaller. So let's make this practical. Imagine the moment you notice you've been ghosted. Your brain wants certainty. It wants an answer right now. It's like an itch, and checking your phone is scratching it. The check gives you a half second of relief, then the itch comes back stronger. That loop can eat an entire day without you realizing it. And while it's happening, you're not just losing time, you're losing authority over your own attention. That's the hidden cost. Your mood becomes dependent on someone else's behavior, and that's a fragile way to live. What we're building today is a stronger inner story. Not the fake kind where you tell yourself you don't care. A real story that says, this outcome is about fit, timing, and their capacity, not a verdict on my worth. A story that lets you feel disappointed without collapsing into humiliation. A story that lets you stay open without becoming needy. A story that keeps you moving forward. You might be thinking, okay, but it really does mean something when someone vanishes. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it means they're inconsiderate. Sometimes it means they're overwhelmed. Sometimes it means they're avoidant. Sometimes it means they met someone else. Sometimes it means they lost interest. But here's the point, you usually don't know which one it is, and you burn yourself alive trying to guess. Emotional control starts when you stop treating guessing as a requirement for peace. In this lesson, we're going to make you the kind of person who can handle a no without self-destruction and handle silence without turning into a detective. You'll still care. You'll still want a connection. You'll still feel a drop in your stomach sometimes. But you won't hand over your entire identity to a moment you can't control. As Seneca notes in Letters to Lucilius II, the mind becomes steadier when it stops chasing what it cannot command. You can't command someone to reply, to choose you, to show up. But you can command your response, your standards, and your next move. And to keep you hooked in a useful way, here's what's coming later. In a bit, we'll walk through a Friday night situation where you're waiting on a message that matters to you. Hours pass. Your brain starts writing worst-case stories. You're tempted to send, "Hey, are we good?" or to delete the thread and swear off dating forever. That's where you'll see how this approach saves you, right in the moment your old pattern would have taken over. Section 2. Stop doing this one thing. The moment you notice silence, don't assign it meaning. Treat it as incomplete data, because the meaning you invent in the first 5 minutes is usually the thing that wrecks your next 5 hours. If you never learn this, you'll keep paying the same tax over and over, distracted workdays, restless nights, and those little hits to your self-respect when you chase clarity from someone who isn't offering it. Here's the trap. You send a message, a follow-up, a great meeting you, a circling back, a let me know what you think. Then the clock starts. Your brain begins scanning for signs. Your mood gets tied to a notification. And when nothing comes, your mind does what it thinks it has to do. It fills the gap. It doesn't fill the gap with neutral explanations like they're busy or they haven't decided or they're not the kind of communicator you want. It fills it with a harsh story that feels protective but actually weakens you. They saw through me, or I'm not worth replying to, or I always get left. That story feels like realism, but it's not realism. It's an emotional reflex trying to force certainty out of uncertainty. The stakes are bigger than one person responding. When you treat silence as proof, you start negotiating with your own dignity. You send extra messages you don't even like sending. You rewrite yourself in real time. You start performing instead of connecting. Or you go the other direction and shut down, telling yourself you don't care, while your body is clearly tense and your mind keeps checking anyway. Either path steals focus, or focus is your life. When your attention is held hostage by missing replies, you're not present for work, health, friendships, or the next opportunity that could actually be good for you. This shift works because it separates what happened from what it means. What happened is simple, you don't have a response yet. That's it. Everything beyond that is interpretation. And interpretation is the part you can train. When you practice labeling silence as incomplete data, you stop treating your first emotional impulse as a final conclusion. You don't have to pretend you're fine. You just stop turning a delay into a verdict. This is how a calmer, more focused version of you responds instead of reacting. Not by being numb, but by being disciplined with meaning. Here's your microscript. Use it exactly like this: no story until I have facts. If you want a slightly softer version that still keeps you grounded, use this: I don't know what this means yet, and I'm not deciding today. Either one works. The point is that you're refusing to let your mind lock in a narrative while the situation is still unresolved. Now let's put it into a real North American moment that's common and brutal. You had a Zoom interview on Tuesday. It went well. The recruiter even said, "We'll be in touch by Friday." Friday afternoon arrives, and nothing. You start opening your email every few minutes, refreshing your inbox, checking spam, rereading the "thanks for your time" note you sent, and hunting for signs you sounded desperate. By Friday night, you're not just disappointed, you're mentally rewriting the entire interview, hearing your own voice in your head, judging every answer, and feeling that heavy, embarrassed pressure behind your ribs like you did something wrong. You draft a follow-up email that's too long, trying to sound confident but secretly asking for reassurance. Or you go silent and decide you're never applying again because it hurts too much. Here's the new response. You notice the silence. Your body reacts. Of course it does. Your stomach drops a little, your mind speeds up, and you feel the urge to get control back by getting an answer right now. That's the moment you use the script: no story until I have facts. You say it once, quietly. You close the email tab. You don't ban yourself from caring, you just ban yourself from self-punishment. Later that evening, the thought comes back, so you repeat it again: no story until I have facts. And instead of spending the night refreshing, you do something that respects your future self. You make dinner, you take a shower, you go to bed on time, and you protect your Saturday morning. Then, if you still don't hear back, you follow up when you said you would, with a clean message that doesn't bleed anxiety. Either way, you keep your power, because your worth wasn't up for debate in the first place. Notice what changed. Not the outcome. The outcome might still be a no. The change is that you didn't stack extra suffering on top of the uncertainty. You didn't turn the waiting period into a self-esteem emergency. You didn't try to earn peace by chasing information you can't force. Now for a tiny action you can take today that's measurable. Pick one situation where you're waiting for a reply, and set a clear meaning delay rule. For the next 24 hours, you're not allowed to interpret it. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel, but you're not allowed to conclude what it says about you. Every time your mind tries, you repeat the script and move your attention to something physical and immediate for 60 seconds. Wash one dish, take a short walk to the mailbox, tidy one surface, or do 10 slow breaths while your phone stays face down. This isn't avoidance. This is training. Let's do a slow practice moment right now, together, so this isn't just a nice idea. Take 3 slow breaths with me. In through your nose, hold for a beat, out through your mouth. Again, in, hold, out. One more, in, hold, out. Now say the sentence in your head like you mean it: no story until I have facts. Say it again, a little slower, as if you're speaking to a younger version of you who panics in silence. When you feel your shoulders drop even slightly, that's the point. You're teaching your body that uncertainty is uncomfortable, not unsafe. And here's what to watch for over the next day. Your mind will try to bargain. It will say, "But if I don't interpret it, I'll be blindsided." That's a lie. You're not refusing reality. You're refusing imagination disguised as reality. When the facts arrive, you'll deal with them. When they haven't arrived, you'll live your life. Hold on to this, because later, when it's not a recruiter but someone you actually like, and the silence lands on a Friday night when you're tired and more vulnerable, this is the exact skill that keeps you from chasing, collapsing, or shutting down. Section 3. The next shift is this: stop responding to rejection or ghosting in real time. Put a deliberate pause between the trigger and your response, because whatever you do in the first emotional spike is rarely aligned with your values. If you don't build this pause, you'll keep sending messages, emails, or signals that feel urgent in the moment and embarrassing later, and each one quietly chips away at your self-respect. The stakes here are subtle but serious. When you react immediately, you teach your nervous system that emotions get to make decisions. That might look like firing off a follow-up text 5 minutes after being ignored, or sending a long explanation saying you didn't owe anyone, or snapping back with passive aggression to protect your pride. Other times it looks calmer on the surface but costs just as much. You go silent in a way that's meant to punish, you withdraw completely, or you decide you're done with trying. In every version, the outcome isn't chosen. It's automatic. And when your actions are automatic, you don't feel in control of your life. This pause works because emotions rise faster than judgment. Your body reacts before your thinking brain has a chance to catch up. Heart rate increases, thoughts speed up, and your mind starts scanning for relief. Relief often looks like action. Any action. But acting isn't the same as responding. Responding requires enough space to ask, what would I respect myself for tomorrow? This is how a steadier version of you behaves under pressure, not by suppressing feelings, but by refusing to let them rush the process. Here's the exact microscript for this section. Memorize it. Use it internally and externally if needed. I don't respond while I'm activated. That's it. Short, clear, and firm. You're not saying you'll never respond. You're saying you won't respond while your emotions are loud. If you need an outward-facing version for work or relationships, use this: I need a little time to think. I'll get back to you tomorrow. It sounds calm because it is calm. Let's put this into a realistic North American scenario where this usually falls apart. You've been talking to someone you like. There's been momentum. Then, suddenly, replies slow down. One night, you send a message asking about plans. An hour passes. Then 2. You see them post a story online. You feel a surge of heat in your chest. Your thoughts jump straight to, they're ignoring me, followed by, I should say something now before I lose my chance. You start typing. You delete. You type again. The message gets longer. More explanatory. More exposed. You're seconds away from pressing send. Now watch the new behavior. You notice the activation. Tight chest. Shallow breath. Slight panic mixed with irritation. That's your cue. You say the sentence to yourself, I don't respond while I'm activated. You don't argue with the feeling. You don't shame yourself for having it. You just pause. You put the phone face down on the table. 10 minutes later, the urge comes back. You repeat the sentence. You don't respond tonight. The next morning, your body is calmer. When you reread the message you almost sent, you're relieved you didn't. Whether you choose to respond later or not, you do it from clarity instead of pressure. And that difference shows. What changed isn't the other person. It's you. You didn't chase reassurance. You didn't try to control the outcome with urgency. You protected your dignity in a moment where it's usually traded away cheaply. Here's a tiny action you can take today that makes this real. Set a personal rule: no emotionally loaded replies after 9 p.m. If that feels too specific, make it situational instead. No replies within the first 30 minutes of feeling triggered. You don't need to announce this rule to anyone. It's for you. The goal isn't delay for its own sake. The goal is letting your nervous system settle enough that your response reflects who you want to be. Let's slow this down together for a practice moment. Right now, imagine the last message or silence that activated you. Don't analyze it. Just notice where you feel it in your body. Is it in your chest? Your throat? Your jaw? Take a slow breath in through your nose. Let it fill that area. Hold for a beat. Then let it out slowly. As you exhale, repeat the sentence quietly in your mind: I don't respond while I'm activated. Say it again, slower. Notice that the feeling doesn't disappear, but it becomes less urgent. That's the pause working. Your mind might push back and say, "But if I wait, I'll lose my chance." That's fear talking, not wisdom. Acting from fear doesn't increase your chances, it just reveals insecurity. Acting from calm doesn't guarantee the outcome you want, but it guarantees something just as important: you won't make it worse. You won't add regret on top of disappointment. This pause also protects you in professional settings. Think about getting a rejection email for a role you wanted. You might reply immediately with a rushed thank you that sounds brittle, or worse, a defensive note trying to explain why they're wrong. You reads it, feels the drop, and pauses. You don't respond while activated. Later, when you do respond, it's clean, professional, and aligned with your long-term reputation. You don't burn bridges because your emotions didn't get the keyboard. Over time, this pause builds trust with yourself. You start to believe, "I can handle uncomfortable feelings without acting them out." That belief is stabilizing. It means silence doesn't own you. Rejection doesn't rush you. You move at your pace, not at the speed of your anxiety. Hold on to this rule, because later, when the situation is heavier, when it's not just a text but a pattern of mixed signals or a delayed answer that really matters, this pause is what keeps you from doing something you can't take back. Section 4. The next shift is learning how to separate rejection from your identity, because as long as you fuse the two, every no feels like a verdict on who you are. If you don't break this link, rejection and ghosting won't just hurt in the moment, they'll slowly rewrite how you see yourself, making you more guarded, more reactive, and less willing to show up honestly. Here's the claim to hold on to: rejection is feedback about fit, timing, or capacity, not a definition of your value. The microstakes are clear. If you keep treating outcomes as identity statements, you'll start negotiating against yourself. You'll lower standards, tolerate ambiguity you don't like, or contort your behavior to avoid another hit to your ego. Over time, that erodes self-respect far more than any single rejection ever could. This works because the human brain is a pattern-making machine. When something painful happens, it looks for a stable explanation, and identity explanations feel stable. "I wasn't chosen because I'm not enough" feels solid, even if it's brutal. But identity explanations are lazy explanations. They collapse a complex situation into a single, self-blaming story that your mind can reuse. A calmer, more grounded version of you learns to keep outcomes specific and temporary instead of global and permanent. That's not positive thinking. That's accurate thinking. The sentence you'll use here is short and direct. Say this to yourself: exactly, this outcome speaks to fit, not my worth. If that feels too abstract at first, use this version: I can be disappointed without making this about who I am. These lines aren't meant to erase emotion. They're meant to stop emotion from turning into a character judgment. Let's see how this plays out in a familiar North American situation. You went on 2 dates with someone you genuinely liked. The conversations flowed. There was laughter, shared values, even talk about future plans. After the second date, you send a message saying you had a good time. Hours pass. Then a day. Then you get a polite message saying they didn't feel the connection they were hoping for. You read it and feel the drop immediately. Your chest tightens. Your mind starts replaying the dates, scanning for mistakes. You think, if even this didn't work, what does that say about me? That thought lingers for days. You start pulling back from matches. You half-heartedly reply to new messages. You carry the rejection forward like evidence. Now watch the new response. You read the message. It still hurts. That doesn't magically go away. But instead of letting it expand into an identity statement, you pause and use the sentence: this outcome speaks to fit, not my worth. You remind yourself that chemistry is subjective, timing matters, and people choose based on things you may never see. You don't argue with disappointment. You just keep it in its proper size. The next day, when you open the app again, you're not trying to prove anything. You're just continuing. The rejection didn't harden you, and it didn't define you. Here's the subtle power move in this approach. You stop using rejection as a referendum on your future. One person's no doesn't become a prediction that others will say the same. You don't inflate the moment into a story about always or never. That keeps your nervous system from learning the wrong lesson. Now for a tiny action you can take today that reinforces this. The next time you experience rejection or ghosting, write one sentence that keeps the outcome specific. For example, this didn't move forward with this person, or this opportunity didn't work out this time. That's it. No adjectives. No conclusions. You're training your brain to describe events without smuggling identity judgments into them. Let's slow this down with a practice moment, because this is where the habit really forms. Right now, bring to mind a recent rejection that still stings a little. Don't dramatize it. Just picture it. Take a slow breath in through your nose. Let it expand your chest. Hold for a beat. Then let it out slowly. As you exhale, say the sentence quietly in your mind, "This outcome speaks to fit, not my worth." Say it again, slower, as if you're teaching it to your body. Notice the difference between feeling disappointed and feeling defective. They're not the same sensation. Your mind may resist this. It might say, "But if I don't take this personally, I won't improve." That's another trap. Improvement doesn't come from global self-criticism. It comes from specific feedback and deliberate adjustment. When rejection contains useful information, you can look at it later, calmly. When it doesn't, you don't invent lessons just to punish yourself. You can grow without turning growth into self-attack. This separation also protects you from overcorrecting. When you internalize rejection, you tend to swing too far. You become overly accommodating, overly impressive, or overly guarded. None of those states are attractive or sustainable. When you keep your worth stable, you can adjust behavior without contorting yourself. You stay flexible without becoming desperate. Think about how this shows up at work. You pitch an idea in a meeting and it doesn't get traction. You walk away thinking, "I'm bad at this," and stop speaking up. New you feels the sting, then reframes, "That idea didn't land with this group at this time." The next meeting, you still contribute. You don't need to rebuild your confidence from scratch because it was never demolished. Over time, this practice creates emotional insulation. Not armor, insulation. You still feel heat and cold, but it doesn't penetrate all the way to your core. You don't need to pretend rejection doesn't matter. You just refuse to let it rewrite your identity. Hold on to this distinction, because later, when the stakes are higher, when it's not just a date or a message but a pattern of mixed signals or a long silence that tempts you to question your value, this is the skill that keeps you steady. Section 5. The next shift is learning how to stop chasing emotional closure from people who aren't offering it, because as long as you believe you need their response to feel settled, you'll keep giving away control. If you don't change this, ghosting won't just hurt, it will keep you stuck, replaying conversations, drafting messages you never send, and waiting for someone else to release you from the loop. Here's the claim to anchor this section: closure is something you give yourself, not something you receive from another person. The microstakes are real. When you rely on someone else to close the emotional door, you stay mentally attached to situations that are already over. You keep one foot in the past while trying to move forward, and that split attention drains your energy, your confidence, and your ability to be present with people who actually show up. This works because the brain mistakes unanswered questions for unfinished business. It believes that if you just get one more explanation, one more confirmation, or one more honest message, you'll finally relax. But in most cases, that explanation never comes, or when it does, it doesn't actually soothe you. It just creates a new question. A steadier, more emotionally controlled version of you learns that peace doesn't come from knowing why someone disappeared. It comes from deciding what you do next regardless of why. Here's the exact microscript for this moment. Say it internally, word for word: "I'm allowed to move on without understanding everything." If you want a version that feels firmer, use this instead: "I don't need their explanation to respect myself." These sentences aren't about denial. They're about ending the internal negotiation. Let's put this into a concrete, familiar situation. You were seeing someone for a few weeks. Nothing dramatic happened. No argument. No clear ending. The replies just slowed, then stopped. Days pass. Old you keeps thinking, if I just knew what went wrong, I could fix it next time. You replay the last conversation. You wonder if you said too much, not enough, or the wrong thing at the wrong time. You consider sending a message asking for honesty, not because you truly need it, but because you want relief. You tell yourself it's about growth, but really, it's about easing the discomfort of not knowing. Now watch the new response. You notice the urge to reach out for closure. You feel that tight, restless energy, the sense that you can't fully move forward until this is resolved. That's when you use the sentence, "I'm allowed to move on without understanding everything." You don't rush to block or erase them. You don't dramatize the ending. You simply stop waiting. You shift your attention back to your life as it exists right now. The silence doesn't magically stop hurting, but it stops owning your mental space. Here's the key distinction. Closure doesn't mean approval. Closure means you stop asking someone else to finish a story you can end yourself. When you wait for their explanation, you're still giving them authority over how long you stay emotionally stuck. When you decide to move on, you take that authority back. Now let's talk about how this shows up in work and professional life, because it's just as common there. You apply for a role. You interview. You follow up. Then nothing. Weeks pass. Old you keeps refreshing email, checking LinkedIn, and wondering if you should send just one more note. You tell yourself you're being proactive, but underneath, you're hoping for certainty so you can stop thinking about it. New you acknowledges the disappointment, then uses the rule, closure is self-generated. You decide, if I don't hear back by this date, I'm mentally closing this loop. You keep applying elsewhere. You don't pause your momentum waiting for one outcome to resolve. Here's a tiny action you can take today that makes this practical. Choose one unresolved situation where you've been waiting for clarity, one text thread, one job application, one conversation that ended awkwardly. Decide on a specific closure action that doesn't involve them. For example, you delete the draft message you keep rewriting. Or you archive the email thread. Or you mark a date on your calendar to follow up once, cleanly, and then move on. The action should be small but final enough that your brain understands the loop is closed. Let's slow this down with a practice moment, because this urge for closure lives in the body as much as the mind. Right now, think of the situation where you feel unfinished. Notice the sensation it creates. Maybe it's a buzzing in your chest, a pressure behind your eyes, or a restless urge to do something. Take a slow breath in. Hold for a beat. Then let it out slowly. As you exhale, repeat the sentence, "I'm allowed to move on without understanding everything." Say it again, slower. Notice how the urgency softens, even if the sadness remains. That's you choosing relief over rumination. Your mind may argue back. It might say, "But if I don't get closure, I'll repeat the same mistakes." That's another false bargain. Learning doesn't require emotional autopsies. You can reflect later, calmly, on what you'd do differently next time, without needing someone else's participation. Growth happens when you're regulated, not when you're chasing explanations from people who've already disengaged. There's also a quiet dignity in this move. When you stop asking for closure, you stop positioning yourself as someone who needs permission to move forward. You don't demand answers. You don't punish with silence. You simply redirect your energy to places where it's returned. That shift alone changes how you show up in future connections. You're less tense, less watchful, more grounded. This doesn't mean you never ask questions or seek clarity in healthy relationships. It means you recognize when clarity isn't being offered and you adjust accordingly. Emotional control isn't forcing conversations that aren't happening. It's noticing what's real and responding to that reality instead of fighting it. Over time, this practice builds emotional momentum. Situations resolve faster internally, even when they don't resolve externally. You spend less time mentally stuck in limbo. You free up attention for people and opportunities that are present, responsive, and aligned. Keep this tool close, because later, when silence stretches on and part of you still hopes for an explanation, this is what lets you close the door gently, without slamming it or standing there waiting forever. Section 6. The next shift is learning how to protect your emotional energy by setting personal reply rules, because without them, other people's timing quietly controls your mood. If you don't do this, ghosting and delayed responses won't just hurt occasionally, they'll keep pulling you into a constant state of low-level anxiety where you're always half waiting, half distracted, and never fully present. Here's the core claim: you need clear reply windows for yourself, not to control others, but to stabilize your own nervous system. The microstakes are simple but serious. When you stay constantly available and reactive, you train your brain to treat every notification, or lack of one, as urgent. That urgency fragments your attention, disrupts your sleep, and makes you feel dependent on external validation to feel settled. Over time, that erodes your sense of agency far more than any single rejection ever could. This works because your brain learns from patterns. If you check your phone every few minutes when you're waiting for a reply, your body learns that silence equals alert mode. If you let replies interrupt your evenings, your focus, or your rest, your nervous system never fully stands down. A calmer, more grounded version of you doesn't wait passively for peace. They design conditions where peace has room to exist. Reply rules are not about playing games or appearing aloof. They're about making your life emotionally livable. Here's the microscript that anchors this section. Say it to yourself exactly like this: I respond on my schedule, not my anxieties. If you need an outward-facing version, especially for work or early-stage relationships, use this: I'll take a look at this and get back to you tomorrow. Both lines communicate steadiness. Neither apologizes for having a life. Let's see how this plays out in a familiar scenario. You're talking to someone new. The conversations are good, but inconsistent. Sometimes they reply quickly. Sometimes hours pass. You keep your phone nearby all evening, glancing at it during dinner, checking it before bed, and feeling a small spike of hope or disappointment every time the screen lights up, or doesn't. Even when nothing is happening, your attention is partially occupied. You're not fully relaxing. You're waiting. Now watch the new response. You decide on a personal rule: you don't check messages after 8:30 p.m. unless it's urgent or planned. When evening comes, you feel the itch to check anyway. That urge is familiar. But instead of following it, you remind yourself: I respond on my schedule, not my anxieties. You put the phone on the charger in another room. The first night feels uncomfortable. The second night feels slightly easier. Within a week, your body stops expecting resolution at night. If someone replies late, you see it in the morning, calm and rested. If they don't reply, you sleep anyway. Either way, your nervous system learns that your peace isn't dependent on their timing. Notice the difference. You didn't demand anything from them. You didn't send signals or test behavior. You simply changed how available your attention was. That change alone reduces the emotional charge of ghosting and delays, because your life isn't paused waiting for a response. This also applies to work, where boundaries often feel harder to set. Think about an email you send to a manager or client and then immediately start watching for a reply. You keeps the inbox open all afternoon. Each notification triggers a mini adrenaline rush. By the end of the day, you're exhausted without having done much. New You sets a rule: email checks at the top of the hour, or 3 specific times a day. When you notice the urge to refresh, you don't argue with it. You acknowledge it and return to what you were doing. When replies come, you handle them cleanly. When they don't, your focus stays intact. Here's the important psychological shift: boundaries don't reduce connection, they reduce volatility. You're still responsive. You're just not reactive. And people often feel that difference, even if they can't name it. Calm availability reads as confidence. Constant availability reads as tension. Now for a tiny action you can take today. Choose one simple reply window rule and commit to it for the next 48 hours. There could be no message checks during meals. There could be no replies after a certain time. It could be a rule that you wait at least 20 minutes before responding to emotionally loaded messages. Write the rule down somewhere visible. Not as a punishment, but as a reminder that your attention is valuable. Let's slow this down with a practice moment, because breaking the checking habit is as physical as it is mental. Right now, imagine the moment you usually check your phone out of habit. Notice the urge. Where do you feel it? Maybe it's a restless energy in your hands or a pull in your chest. Take a slow breath in. Hold for a beat. Let it out slowly. As you exhale, repeat the sentence, I respond on my schedule, not my anxieties. Say it again, slower. Notice how the urge doesn't disappear, but it loses urgency. That's you reclaiming control in real time. Your mind might push back with a familiar worry, what if I miss something important? That's understandable. But notice how rarely that actually happens. And when it does, you can respond then. Most of the time, what you're missing isn't information, it's reassurance. And reassurance gained through constant checking never lasts. It just resets the loop. There's also a deeper benefit here. When you stop centering your day on replies, you start experiencing time differently. Evenings feel longer. Work blocks feel cleaner. Conversations feel more intentional. You're not half present, waiting for a screen to light up. That presence becomes part of your identity. You're someone who engages fully, not someone who hovers. Over time, this changes how rejection and ghosting land. Silence still happens. Delays still happen. But they don't echo through your entire day. They occupy the space they deserve, no more, no less. You stop living in anticipation mode and start living in actual moments. Keep this rule close, because later, when emotions are higher and the urge to check feels almost automatic, this is the structure that holds you steady. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. And that's exactly why it works. Section 7. The next shift is learning how to respond with self-respect instead of trying to restore emotional balance by pleasing, proving, or punishing. When rejection or ghosting happens, most people swing between two extremes without realizing it. They either overextend, sending extra messages, explanations, jokes, or reassurance, or they withdraw hard, using silence as a shield or a weapon. If you don't correct this pattern, every emotionally charged interaction becomes a test of your worth instead of a simple exchange between two adults. Here's the claim to anchor this section. The goal after rejection is not to be liked again, but to stay aligned with your own standards. The micro-stakes matter. When you try to win back interest, you quietly tell yourself that acceptance is earned through effort. When you punish with silence, you tell yourself that control comes from withdrawal. Both responses give your power away. One hands it over through approval seeking. The other hands it over through resentment. Neither leaves you feeling grounded. This works because self-respect is regulating. When your actions line up with your values, your nervous system settles faster. You don't have to keep replaying the interaction because there's nothing to defend or justify. A calmer, more focused version of you isn't trying to manage how you're perceived in every moment. They're managing how they behave. That's a shift from external control to internal alignment. Here's the exact microscript for this moment. It's short, and it's meant to be boring on purpose. Say this to yourself, I'll respond in a way I can stand behind tomorrow. If you need an outward-facing line, something you might actually send, use this, thanks for letting me know. I wish you the best. That's it. No follow-up question. No emotional subtext. No hidden hook. Let's put this into a concrete situation. You've been messaging someone for a while. There was momentum. Then they send a message saying they're not in the right place for this, or they don't feel the connection they hoped for. Old you feels the sting and immediately looks for a way to reduce it. Maybe you reply with humor to soften the blow. Maybe you explain yourself, hoping they'll reconsider. Or maybe you don't reply at all, telling yourself they don't deserve a response, while secretly wishing they'd notice your absence. Now watch the new response. You read the message. Your body reacts. You feel that familiar mix of disappointment and vulnerability. Instead of acting on it, you pause and ask, what response would I respect myself for tomorrow? The answer isn't dramatic. It's simple. You send the clean line, thanks for letting me know. I wish you the best. Then you stop engaging. Not as punishment. As completion. You don't linger. You don't keep the door half open. You close the loop with dignity. Notice what didn't happen. You didn't try to perform emotional maturity. You didn't pretend it didn't hurt. You didn't escalate or disappear. You responded in a way that didn't require you to manage the other person's feelings or your own image. That's self-respect in action. This also applies when ghosting happens instead of a clear message. Let's say days pass with no reply. You might send a just checking in text that carries hope and anxiety at the same time. Or you might abruptly block them in a rush of pride. You pauses and checks alignment. Do you actually need to send something to be okay with yourself? Often, the answer is no. Silence can be met with silence when it's clean and chosen, not reactive. That's the difference between a boundary and a tantrum. Here's an important distinction to hold. Responding with self-respect doesn't mean being cold or closed. It means being complete. You're not trying to extract reassurance. You're not trying to teach a lesson. You're simply acting in a way that doesn't make you cringe later. Now for a tiny action you can take today. Write down one sentence that represents a self-respecting response for you. Not the perfect one. Just one that feels calm and final. It could be, I appreciate the honesty. Take care. Or, got it. Wishing you well. Keep it somewhere easy to find. The point is to reduce decision-making when emotions are high. When the moment comes, you don't need to improvise under pressure. Let's slow this down with a practice moment. Right now, imagine the last time you responded in a way that didn't feel good afterward. Maybe you over-explained. Maybe you snapped. Maybe you went silent to protect your pride. Notice how that memory feels in your body. Now imagine responding differently, short, clear, and aligned. Take a slow breath in. Hold for a beat. Let it out slowly. As you exhale, say the sentence quietly in your mind, I'll respond in a way I can stand behind tomorrow. Say it again, slower. Notice the sense of steadiness that comes with that image. Your mind might object and say, but if I don't show how much I care, they won't understand. That's another trap. People don't need you to display your pain in order to respect you. And the right people don't require you to earn clarity through emotional labor. When you respond with restraint, you're not hiding your feelings. You're choosing where they go. There's also a long-term benefit here that's easy to miss. Every time you respond with self-respect, you reinforce an identity. I handle disappointment well. Not perfectly. Well enough. That identity compounds. The next time rejection happens, it still hurts, but it doesn't destabilize you. You trust yourself to handle it. And that trust is calming. This approach also changes how you show up in new connections. You're less guarded, not more, because you're no longer afraid of how you'll react if things don't work out. You know you won't abandon yourself. That confidence isn't loud. It's quiet. But it's felt. Over time, you stop measuring success by outcomes you can't control and start measuring it by conduct you can. Did you act with clarity? Did you keep your dignity? Did you avoid making the situation heavier than it needed to be? Those are wins, even when the answer from the other side is no. Hold on to this, because when emotions are highest and the temptation to either chase or vanish is strongest, this is the skill that keeps you centered. It won't make rejection painless, but it will make it clean. Section 8. The next shift is learning how to keep your life moving even when rejection or ghosting hasn't resolved yet, because emotional control isn't just about how you think. It's about what you do with your time and energy afterward. If you don't build this skill, silence freezes you. You pause your plans, your focus drifts, and you quietly wait for an outcome before fully re-entering your own life. That waiting is where a lot of unnecessary suffering lies. Here's the claim for this section: you don't wait for emotional resolution before continuing your life. You continue your life and let resolution catch up. The microstakes are important. When you stall your routines, your goals, or your social world while waiting for clarity, you amplify the power of rejection. One unanswered message starts to control your schedule, your mood, and your sense of forward motion. Over time, this teaches your brain that connection equals suspension, and that's a dangerous association. This works because action regulates emotion. When you keep moving, physically, socially, mentally, your nervous system gets new signals that life is still happening. The mind spirals most aggressively when there's nothing competing for its attention. A more emotionally controlled version of you doesn't try to think their way out of pain while sitting still. They give their body and attention somewhere else to go. That's not avoidance. That's rebalancing. Here's the microscript that anchors this behavior. Say it to yourself exactly like this: I don't put my life on hold for unanswered messages. If you want a softer internal version, use, I can feel this and still move forward today. These sentences aren't about dismissing the feeling. They're about refusing to let it dictate your entire day. Let's ground this in a realistic scenario. You're waiting to hear back from someone you care about. It could be a dating situation, a potential collaboration, or a job lead. Old you subtly reorganizes the day around the wait. You delay starting a task because they might text. You half listen in conversations. You keep your evening open just in case. Hours pass, and by the time night comes, you're drained, not from effort, but from anticipation. Even if the message finally arrives, you feel oddly empty because your whole day revolved around something you didn't control. Now watch the new response. You notice the waiting impulse early. You feel that tug to stay available, just in case. That's when you use the sentence, I don't put my life on hold for unanswered messages. Then you make one deliberate choice to continue your day as planned. You start the workout you were debating skipping. You cook the meal instead of ordering out and scrolling. You keep the social plan instead of canceling to be flexible. The feeling of disappointment might still be there, but it's no longer the center of gravity. Your day has structure again. Notice what changed. You didn't suppress hope. You didn't force indifference. You simply refused to reorganize your life around uncertainty. That alone weakens the emotional grip of ghosting, because the silence no longer gets a monopoly on your attention. This is especially important in the evenings, when emotional spirals hit hardest. Nights are quieter. Distractions fade. The mind gets louder. That's why waiting hurts more after dark. A self-regulated response doesn't mean numbing out with endless scrolling. It means choosing an anchor activity, something physical, social, or absorbing enough to hold your attention without harming you. A walk. A workout. Cooking. Cleaning one space. Reading something tangible. Calling a friend. These aren't escapes. They're stabilizers. Now here's a tiny action you can take today that makes this practical and measurable. Choose one non-negotiable continuation activity for the next time you're waiting on a reply. Decide it in advance. It could be a 30-minute walk, a gym session, a focused work block, or a simple household task. Write it down mentally or physically. If I'm waiting and my mind starts looping, I do this. The key is that the activity happens regardless of whether you get a response. Let's slow this down with a practice moment so your body understands the shift. Right now, imagine yourself waiting for a message later today or this week. Notice the urge to hover. Now take a slow breath in through your nose. Hold for a beat. Let it out slowly. As you exhale, say the sentence in your mind, I don't put my life on hold for unanswered messages. Say it again, slower. Then imagine yourself standing up and physically starting the continuation activity you chose. Notice how that image feels different from waiting. There's movement, direction, agency. Your mind may push back and say, But what if they reply while I'm busy? That's okay. You'll see it later. Nothing breaks. The world doesn't end. In fact, replying when you're already grounded usually leads to better responses anyway. You're calmer, less reactive, more yourself. There's also a deeper identity shift happening here. When you continue your life without waiting, you stop seeing rejection as a pause button. You start seeing it as background noise, unpleasant, but not all-consuming. You're someone with momentum, not someone orbiting other people's decisions. That identity quietly rebuilds confidence without you having to hype yourself up. This approach also protects you from overinvesting too early. When you don't freeze your life for someone else's reply, you naturally pace emotional attachment. You stay open without becoming dependent. You're interested, not consumed. That balance makes rejection less destabilizing because you haven't bet your entire sense of aliveness on one outcome. Over time, this practice changes how silence feels in your body. It still registers. You still notice it. But instead of collapsing inward, your attention flows outward again. You become harder to knock off center, not because you care less, but because you're rooted in more than one source of meaning. Keep this skill close, because when we move into the long story next, where multiple pressures stack up and the weight feels heavier, this ability to keep your life moving is what prevents one unanswered message from hijacking an entire evening or weekend. Section 9. It's Friday night, and the week has already taken more out of you than you expected. Work ran long. Your brain feels noisy. You're finally home, shoes off, sitting on the edge of the couch with your phone in your hand. Earlier in the week, you made loose plans with someone you've been seeing. Nothing formal, just a let's do something Friday. You sent a message that afternoon to confirm. Now it's evening. Still no reply. This is the moment that used to undo you. You notice the familiar sensations first. A tightness in your chest. A subtle heat behind your eyes. The urge to check the thread again, even though you already know what it says. Part of you wants to send a light follow-up, something casual that pretends you're not waiting. Another part of you wants to shut the whole thing down, tell yourself this is why you hate dating, and retreat into scrolling and distraction. The old pattern is right there, ready. You catch yourself. Not because the feeling disappeared, but because you recognize it. This is activation. This is that spike where reacting always makes things worse. You remember the rule you've been practicing all week: you don't respond while you're activated. You put the phone face down on the coffee table. Just for now. You stand up and take a slow breath in through your nose. Hold it for a beat. Let it out slowly. The feeling doesn't vanish, but it loosens enough for you to think. You hear the sentence in your head, no story until I have facts. Right now, the only fact is that you haven't heard back yet. Everything else your mind is offering is imagination wearing the mask of certainty. You walk into the kitchen and pour yourself a glass of water. As you drink it, you feel the pull again. What if they're ignoring you? What if they're out with someone else? What if you misread everything? The thoughts come fast, overlapping. You pause again, just long enough to remind yourself, this outcome speaks to fit, not my worth. Even if this ends tonight, it doesn't get to rewrite who you are. Your phone buzzes on the table. Your stomach flips. For a second, you don't move. You let the sensation rise and fall instead of grabbing the phone immediately. Another slow breath. I respond to my schedule, not my anxiety. When you pick up the phone, you notice your hands are steadier than they would have been a month ago. It's a message. An apology. They say the day got away from them. They're tired and not up for going out, but they wanted to let you know. No dramatic explanation. No rejection either. Just a quiet reality. There's a moment, just a moment, where the old urge tries to sneak in. You could reply instantly. You could soften it with humor, showing how easygoing you are. Or you could withdraw, reading disappointment into every word. You feel that fork in the road. You remember another question you've been practicing: what response would I respect myself for tomorrow? The answer isn't clever. It's clean. You type a short reply that reflects how you actually feel without chasing or punishing. Something simple, kind, complete. You send it, then put the phone down again. There's no rush now. The night is still yours. Instead of hovering, you follow through on the plan you set earlier in the week. You change into comfortable clothes and step outside for a short walk. The air is cooler than you expected. As you walk, you feel the leftover tension moving through your body instead of staying trapped in your chest. You're still a little disappointed. That's honest. But you're not spiraling. You're not narrating your own inadequacy. You're just walking. Halfway around the block, you pause for a moment. You take another slow breath and quietly repeat the sentence that's been carrying you through this week: I don't put my life on hold for unanswered messages. Even though you got an answer this time, the sentence still applies. Your evening didn't hinge on someone else's availability. It unfolded because you chose to keep moving. When you get back home, you realize something subtle but important. The night didn't collapse. You didn't lose hours to rumination. You didn't send anything you wish you could take back. You didn't harden yourself or chase reassurance. You stayed aligned. Later, as you're getting ready for bed, your phone buzzes again. A follow-up message. Maybe a suggestion to reschedule. Maybe not. You glance at it, read it once, and set the phone down. There's no urgency. You'll respond tomorrow, when you're rested. You trust that version of yourself more. As you lie in bed, the thoughts are quieter than they used to be in moments like this. Not gone. Just quieter. You notice the difference between disappointment and despair. One is a feeling. The other is a story. Tonight, you didn't let the story run. And that's the real outcome of this moment. Not whether the connection continues or fades, but that you went through uncertainty without abandoning yourself. You protected your attention. You kept your dignity. You let the evening be an evening instead of a referendum on your worth. As sleep starts to come, you realize this is what emotional control actually looks like in real life. Not dramatic strength. Just steady choices, made one moment at a time. Section 10. This episode was really about one core shift: learning how to respond to rejection and ghosting with intention instead of letting them drag you into automatic reactions. When you stop reacting, you stop handing your attention over to silence, you stop treating delays like a verdict, and you stop turning one outcome into a story about your entire worth. The goal was never to make you feel nothing. The goal was to help you stay steady while you feel something, so your emotions stop dictating your choices and your week doesn't get hijacked by one unanswered message. First, we slowed down and named the real pain: how ghosting and rejection can hit like a punch and keep you spiraling for days, draining your focus, your sleep, and your willingness to keep putting yourself out there. Then we challenged the fastest habit that causes most of the suffering: assigning meaning too quickly. You practice treating silence as incomplete data, refusing to decide what it means before you have facts, because your first interpretation is usually your most self-punishing one. Next, we built the pause, your ability to delay responses when you're activated, so you don't send texts, emails, or reactions that feel urgent in the moment and embarrassing later. After that, we separated outcomes from identity, so rejection stays specific and doesn't become "something is wrong with me." Then we addressed the closure trap, the belief that you need someone else's explanation in order to relax, and you practiced giving closure to yourself, because waiting for answers keeps you mentally tied to people who aren't showing up. From there, you created stability through personal reply rules, protecting your attention and nervous system so other people's timing stops controlling your mood. Next, you learned to respond with self-respect rather than pleasing, proving, or punishing, using clean, complete language that you can stand behind tomorrow. After that, you practiced keeping your life moving even when the situation hasn't resolved, because momentum regulates emotion and waiting is where spirals grow. Finally, you saw it all stress-tested in that Friday night story, where the old reaction almost took over, but you stayed grounded by using the pause, refusing to invent a story, and continuing your evening without putting your life on hold. Now let's turn it into exactly 3 do-today steps you can execute without overthinking. Today, pick one thread or situation that's currently spiking your anxiety and commit to no story until I have facts for the next 24 hours. Every time your mind tries to interpret the silence, you repeat the sentence once and redirect your attention to one physical action for 60 seconds. Today, set one reply boundary that protects your nervous system, something simple like no emotionally loaded replies after 9 p.m. or no checking messages during meals, and keep it for 48 hours so your body learns a new pattern. Today, write and save one self-respecting response you can reuse, a short line that closes loops cleanly, so the next time rejection or silence hits you don't improvise from emotion, you will respond from alignment. If this resonated, the next lesson you'll want to watch is about handling mixed signals without overthinking, with a sample title like Mixed Signals, How to Stay Calm and Stop Chasing Clarity, where we go deeper into staying steady when someone is inconsistent and confusing. If you want a whole library of Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships, this is what we do here every week. If you feel messages like this need to reach more people, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.